This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, X-Intelligence unveils John Brennan. With us this evening, back by popular demand, John Guandolo, the president of Understanding the Threat, and Brad Johnson, a former CIA station chief. John and Brad, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
This is exciting. We've got two former intelligence agents, or maybe even spies, could I say, or maybe that's not completely accurate, but one from FBI, one from CIA. What do you guys think about being together here on my show?
Certainly grateful, and I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight, Jamie.
Yeah, ditto from me, and I've certainly worked with the FBI and very well in the past, so there's no reason to change now.
Okay, absolutely. Now, just very quickly, because sometimes titles are too short. John, you're with Understanding the Threat, but can you give another couple sentences to our viewers about yourself?
Sure. I'm a Naval Academy graduate, infantry, Marine officer, reconnaissance officer, combat veteran, and spent about 7 years in the Marine Corps and about 13 years in the FBI. Last 5.5+ years in the counterterrorism division. And now, after my time in the FBI, spent several years in the Department of Defense doing strategic analysis on the Islamic threat. And under the Obama administration, our work was defunded. So I started in the summer 2012, Understanding the Threat, to do the same kind of work that I was doing inside the FBI and the Department of Defense, which is educating and training folks on the threat and how to deal with it at the local and state level.
Absolutely, and thank you for everything that you're doing, John, but I don't think you mentioned the most important thing. I've heard that you're a musician, you sing songs, and also songs about jihad and about America defending itself from jihad and for freedom. Is this true?
There is truth in that. I am a songwriter as well. Been known to do some recordings, serious recordings as well as counter-jihad songs.
We might twist your arm to sing a song at the end of this program or the next one, okay?
All right.
Brad Johnson, former CIA chief, and what else should we know about you?
Well, I can say quite truthfully that I have absolutely no musical talent whatsoever, so that won't go on my list. But yeah, former station chief, operations officer for the CIA. I had 25 years in the agency and retired out of the CIA. And out of those 25 years, there were only about 3 years that were at headquarters. So I'm one of those that spent almost my entire career overseas doing the work that needed to be done and not really hanging out at headquarters, rubbing up against the powers that be. From there, I also got out and did quite a little bit of training back to mainly DOD and Special Forces and folks like that. Similar things from similar background, counterterrorism and counterinsurgency and those sorts of operations. From there, then I founded an organization when I started to see a lot of the intelligence problems, and certainly the topic for tonight of John Brennan being the former director of the CIA is such a superb example of why I founded Americans for Intelligence Reform, which I'm trying to work on all of that. And of course, the basic underlying goal is, this is a nonprofit organization. The underlying goal is to make national security as strong as it can possibly be. And one of the basic tenets of that is strong intelligence. And that has been so tremendously undermined, and certainly in the previous administration, and hasn't really been built back the way it should be under even the current administration. So that's my my main goal at this point.
Fantastic, and that's what I want to get to this evening. And look, I don't want to keep getting off topic here. I'm just a little bit preoccupied with John's music career. So if John sings, Brad, maybe you and I can do some dancing in the background. What do you think?
Yeah, my dancing's probably not going to be so good either. But do let me say, Jamie, I have to congratulate you on your new book, The Jihadist Psychopath. I mean, fabulous stuff. The reviews are great, and I'm not sure which is the greater achievement, this new book, which is doing so well, or being banned off of Facebook and Twitter kind of at the same time. I mean, I aspire to such heights.
Brad, I really appreciate it. Your check is in the mail, and we're going to get into all of this right now on our program. John and Brad, John Brennan, both of you know something about him because of your backgrounds. Now, this guy just had his security clearance stripped. Thank God. Thank you, Lord, for President Trump. Trump is cleaning out this swamp. And I think it's just common sense that he shouldn't have security clearance. Yet he started sobbing and crying about it. The left is just up in arms. But I think that this was a very legitimate thing to do for many reasons. John, you begin telling us why.
Well, I want to say I think there have been several episodes in the last 3 weeks or so that have really brought a much broader truth to light. And I think what you're digging at is this episode with John Brennan not only exposes him even more for who he is, but it also reveals the swamp, the real swamp. Men and women who have hid behind a veil of patriotism and the flag, and yet for years, men inside these organizations that have served with people like Brennan and Admiral McRaven and others who turn out to be standing on the other side of the aisle. I think if you're going to stand beside John Brennan, like a number of people have, and they've officially put their names on a list, you're putting yourself in the enemy camp. John Brennan, what he is guilty of is sedition, and I would argue treason. And this isn't something that happened in the last 2 years. He's made an entire adult lifetime of this. And I don't think it's ever been any secret, but certainly since he began serving in the Obama administration, you just mentioned, I mean, can you imagine a guy who admits he voted for a Communist Party candidate becoming the director of Central Intelligence? This is unfathomable in a sane world. And then you look at the organizations that he has supported, numerous Muslim Brotherhood jihadi organizations in the United States that he's supported, and his behavior towards our system and towards the leadership, specifically the President of the United States.
Thank you, John. And you know, he voted for this communist Gus Hall back in 1976. What I'm very interested in too is they're always talking about John Brennan, former communist. I don't know. I've been doing a lot of research. I don't see any conversion moment where Brennan came forward and said, yeah, I don't think Marxist-Leninism was this great idea. I'm no longer a communist. Never saw that. So I think we can very safely take the former out of the description. Brad, what do you think about what John was just saying?
Well, certainly there are many questions about John Brennan. My focus on him would be one of competency, and certainly this having voted for the Communist Party and all of his antics and things like that. The guy is just a little bit nuts. I mean, the antics on television that he has out of hatred for Trump and having voted communist, and this conversion while he was in Saudi Arabia to Islam, all of these sorts of things. I think I question his judgment just to begin with as a competent individual, but he's just not of the caliber of individual that ever should have been in charge of, a pet store, not to mention the Central Intelligence agencies. So, yeah, it was a disaster from almost the get-go. What he did in his concepts, this modernization program of his, where he implemented a program to increase the cyber warfare capability of the CIA, which now that is fine. That does need to be strong and robust. I'm not saying it wasn't before, but he at least organized it perhaps differently. But the problem with that is, in exchange, what he did was also wipe out the espionage capability of the CIA at the same time. By espionage, I mean very specifically human intelligence going out overseas, recruiting people unilaterally, where only the United States knows that these people are recruited and handled by us. And he just wiped all of that out. And as he said in a famous NPR interview, we don't steal information anymore. We get this from our overseas partners. Well, working with overseas partners is fine and dandy, but the central core mission of the CIA is espionage. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The world's a dangerous place and getting more dangerous, not less dangerous. And espionage is just absolutely key element to national security. And as I said, that's of overriding importance to all of us, and to me, certainly.
Thank you. Now, look, I want to narrow in here on what John Guandolo has been pointing to over the years. It's just incredible how this has become a taboo subject. In terms of how CNN talks about this collusion nonsense every night, you would think that the media would have been talking about this every night and should continue talking about it. John Brennan's conversion to Islam while he was in Saudi Arabia. Did this happen? Did this not happen? Let's say it didn't happen, or it did, but why can't this question be asked? Why hasn't anybody in the establishment media even asked this question one time? It's absolutely incredible. And it matters. If a CIA station chief converts to Islam and is devout and takes surahs 9.5 and 9.29 seriously, it's an issue. John Guandolo, what did you know about this back then, and what do you know about it now?
Well, first of all, I want to comment on something that Brad just said, because I think it's really critical. When I first brought this story to light and gave an interview about it, I had sources in Saudi Arabia that had direct knowledge that John Brennan said the Shahada while he was the station chief over there. And here is what I said in summation on that interview. It was the fact, and this is what Brad's talking about, is his incompetency, his unprofessionalism, John Brennan's unprofessionalism. When you do that in front of Saudi Mubahith, when you do that in front of Saudi officials, it just leaves this huge question mark of where's your loyalty, where's your maturity, where's your professionalism? Those are the questions I raised. Now, to ask the question about somebody converting to Islam, well, of course, Islam, the system of Islam is an evil and barbaric system. Does he know that? Does he know what Sharia requires? Does he know what all Sharia requires? It requires warfare against non-Muslims until the world's under an Islamic state. 100% of Islam requires that. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody that self-identifies as a Muslim believes that. However, all of Islam teaches that. That is the problem. So he's subscribed to an ideology that is hostile towards the United States. He did it in front of Saudi officials, including Saudi intelligence officials. That in a world where these things, where professionalism, and actually if the CIA were doing its core mission, as Brad was alluding to, these are things that are wholly unacceptable and would lead to a guy like that being fired. But he's not only not fired, he's elevated to be the director of the CIA.
And the question was never asked. The question was never asked, John, one time during 8 years.
Right. Part of the reason is he's not the only station chief that converted to Islam. And I can tell you that the two FBI legal attaches in Saudi Arabia on 9/11, the legal attache and the assistant legal attache both converted to Islam by Saudi officials while they were there. I mean, so when you look at this, these are from their perspectives, it's an operation. Yeah. What I'm saying is we are like sixth graders in an environment full of PhDs when it's in the intelligence realm. I believe, look, I don't want to pat our enemies on the back too easily, but I'll just lay it at this and let Brad respond. You will not see Saudi intelligence, Chinese intelligence, and Russian intelligence allowing people to apply for positions in those organizations on the internet like the CIA and the FBI do. It's unprofessional. It's not the way to run a professional intelligence and organization. It's just not the way you do business. You recruit people based on the needs of the organization, and you need less people who are much more effective, not more bodies, because the threats are getting greater.
Thank you, John. Before we go to you, Brad, I just want to make this comment that There's that video of John Brennan giving this little talk there. Everybody look it up. Just look up John Brennan on YouTube, says Islam is a religion of peace and jihad, whatever. It's a 3-minute clip. And he's just on fire talking about Islam being a religion of peace, and he's speaking Arabic. And I've studied fellow travelers all my life, and that euphoria that he's in, it's a typical fellow traveler that's worshiping the totalitarian entity that he's in front of. It's just a very creepy video. Let me go to you, Brad. Hopefully you'll say what you think of that video as well. But let's begin, Brad. What did you hear while you were at the CIA about Brennan's conversion?
Well, that it's true. I mean, I do have, I would say my information is similar to John's. I have a close personal friend I've known for nearly 40 years who was there, speaks Arabic and so on, and says he personally witnessed all of this. So I believe it's true. Now, that's not firsthand knowledge, it's secondhand knowledge, but it's secondhand knowledge from someone who was there, who I know was there, and had access to know. And I'm fully convinced that it's true that he converted to Islam. But I have no proof of that. It's only what someone has told me that I trust. But I believe it's true. Now, I do want to take a little bit different take on some of this stuff. I think that Brennan is still extraordinarily active within the intelligence field, and I think the fact that his clearance was taken away was a fabulous stroke of genius on the part of President Trump. It was really, I think it's going to be extraordinarily helpful, and let me explain why. They just named a new deputy director of the CIA, a guy named Vaughn Bishop. Now, Vaughn Bishop, handpicked by the current director, Gina Haspel. Now, there's something out of that that's extraordinarily unusual, and that was he was pulled out of retirement to come back and fill this deputy director of the CIA slot. Now, that isn't, that does happen from time to time, but in his case, it's the second time. He was also pulled out of retirement by none other than John Brennan to fill the position of ombudsman for his modernization program that we were referring to earlier. Now, that's one guy. There's another guy now who's the chief operating officer, the COO for the CIA, a guy named Andrew McCridis. Andrew was also handpicked by Gina Haspel, also pulled out of retirement to be put into that position, and previously was also handpicked by John Brennan to act as the head of the task force that he created to implement this modernization program. So now Gina Haspel herself was somebody that was a close associate. Nobody's looked at her either. Even in her hearings, her confirmation hearings at the Senate, nobody asked her anything that was very tough. They were going on about the torture program and the waterboarding and all of that. But ask yourself this question: Gina Haspel, again, there's a pattern here. Gina Haspel was chief of station in London. She was handpicked and brought back and made chief of station in London a second time by none other than John Brennan, and at a time when the Steele dossier was being put together. There's not been one person to ever ask a question of Gina Haspel about any of that. Now, don't know, but I would certainly like to know, did Gina Haspel have any part of any of that? All of these people that form the leadership of the CIA are all close associates of John Brennan. Now, the reason I mentioned that I think that this was such a serendipitous act to pull his clearance, he bitches and pisses and moans about the fact that his First Amendment rights are under attack by having this clearance pulled. But he's on MSNBC and NBC all the time saying whatever he wants. The fact that his clearance was pulled makes it easier for him to speak out, not harder, because he doesn't have the problem of maybe mixing up current classified information with whatever the topic of the day is on the news. So it makes it better. What makes it harder for him now is he cannot go back and have classified conversations with all the current leadership within the CIA, which are his close associates. So I think that's the real reason that John Brennan is so angry today at President Trump for having lost his clearance.
Mr. Guandolo.
Yes, I think that's a brilliant analysis, and I would echo that. I think Gina Haspel has been let off the hook in all of this. And while I can't speak to direct evidence that I have, and I don't know what Brad has, but the fact that she was back in London during the time of the entire Steele dossier raises massive questions. I mean, from my experience as an investigator, she would have been grilled about that, because the logical assumption would be that there is at least a high possibility that she had knowledge of that. It would be hard to imagine she didn't in that position, given the level of people. But you know, I'm not a big, as you know, I'm not big into speculation. It just raises questions. I think the other point that I think comes out of all of this, again, we're seeing not only on the Marxist side of it, and I'm talking about the Democrat Party in the United States, not only on those people, the General John Allens, the Admiral McRavens, those people who not only took actions when they were actually in command of things that were detrimental to the warfighting effort, but now standing on the side of these very people that do not stand on the side of our founding principles and the Constitution. And that may sound a little hard line, but I truly believe it. And this is the part that I think people are having an issue with. We just had, for instance, I've just recently been briefing some leaders on how, and I'm just going to take it back to the Islamic movement, has penetrated the Republican establishment, and how they are literally splitting what I would say are those in the more conservative Tea Party, Freedom Caucus type groups, because these are very well-polished Muslims who are part of the jihad, but they are, as we use the military term, a splinter movement. So the suit-wearing jihadis from the Muslim Brotherhood point to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, who are crucifying people, beheading them, setting people on fire, and it's easy for them to look less radical. It's very easy to do. You look much more pleasant. Well, now you've got another line being drawn of people that are starting to point to the Muslim Brotherhood, Muslims, Republicans, saying, I'm not part of that, I'm these guys. And now you have people like Sheriff David Clark, Mark Levin, and other high-profile, clearly conservative patriots who side with these people. And it will be this is how they intend to win this war. Now, in the case of Sheriff David Clark, 2.5 weeks ago, he publicly came out and admitted he was duped, which to me takes incredible humility. But this is, it's in the counterintelligence, the espionage, and that whole political warfare realm where this war is being fought. And the United States, because of many of the things Brad just said, we are not capable. The U.S. government is not capable of fighting this war, which means we're not capable right now of winning. And it's why, understanding the threat, my organization and I have advocated real aggressive actions at the local and state level.
Thank you, John. Brad, very briefly, please go ahead, because I want to finish with one particular issue. Go ahead, Brad.
Okay, I would add one other thing, too. I mean, I'm kind of throwing a new element into it, but Congressman Louis Gohmert came out with a bombshell report. This came out of, he was working with the intelligence community IG, and this came out in his Judicial Committee meeting. But he reported in there that in fact, the Clinton server that has been just talked about ad infinitum was actually never hacked by the Russians. And that's one of the central themes of this diatribe that's been going on against Trump all along. And who was one of the big proponents of this? One of the guys arguing so strenuously, it was John Brennan. And now the facts are out, and it was the Chinese all along doing this, and not even the Russians to begin with. So, I mean, it just, you look at John Brennan and go, it's clearly, he's either a complete idiot and completely incompetent. There's a measure of incompetence no matter what, or he's so politically driven that he just doesn't care about the truth. And I think it's a combination of the incompetence and being politically driven. This report that Congressman Gohmert has put out and the information he's put together is going to explode. And the Chinese espionage ring that was working for the CIA in China that got wrapped up in public reports are there were 18 to 20 people executed. Some reports say up to 30 people were executed. How did the way that those people were identified to the Chinese was never clear. Now we know that the Chinese got these reports. According to the FBI IG report, there may be 50, 60, 70,000 classified documents on this laptop. We know for sure that some of those were CIA documents. So there's every reason to believe, or at least theorize, that within those documents was information from the CIA that identified these Chinese assets, these reporting sources that were reporting back to the CIA, and that's what the Chinese used to identify these people and then execute them. So this whole thing is blowing up now. This is a big deal, and it's going to be very hard to keep the lid on. And as this stuff, by the way, was being reported even back in 2015 by the ICIG, the Intelligence Community IG. Who was in charge? Who is this all being reported to? Who was the man in charge of that, making the decision on what to do or not to do? Our good friend Peter Strzok. So this cabal of these people is just being blown out of the water. And I've said many times, at the center of this, we just constantly find John Brennan. And he's just constantly connected to all these bits and pieces of it, to the Steele dossier, to all of this criticism saying there's intelligence out there that shows Trump was colluding with the Russians, which thing after thing after thing, as it comes up, all proves to be false. So go ahead, Jamie.
I cannot in good conscience go to the issue I wanted to discuss because of everything you just brought up, Brad. So vital. Just let John say what's on his mind while... what did you think of everything Brad has just said, John?
Well, my biggest concern in all of this is a real lack of a sense of urgency in this country in dealing with these issues. I mean, I believe that what Brad just articulated, which I looked at that, what Congressman Gohmert said, and the report, this is devastating. I mean, it is devastating. And when you look back, let's just look back in the last 20 years. I mean, from Robert Hanssen to things that were before Robert Hanssen, these were devastating intelligence penetrations. And if you look at the recommendations from both the FBI, from the CIA in that case, and from just the whole community that was involved in that those episodes, not just Hanssen but others, and many of the recommendations have not been put into place. And now we have people on the inside, as Brad is articulating, that are not just unprofessional. These are people who are intentionally taking actions that are detrimental and may have cost lives. I mean, if we look at just on the plain black and white objective level, Mrs. Clinton, Peter Strzok, John Brennan could be held accountable. There's probable cause to believe they intentionally broke the law and caused grave harm to the United States. They should, at a minimal, go to jail for that.
That's what I was going to ask. John, in your estimation, is there enough evidence to suggest that these people belong in prison?
Well, Mrs. Clinton, absolutely. I believe Peter Strzok, certainly he's broken the law. I mean, he certainly lied under oath at a minimum, but he knowingly, now we know that there were a number of people that knowingly put an affidavit forward in a FISA court in which information was wrong and they knew it. That's perjury, number one. And there are other violations tied to that. But I have shared with you, Jamie, about my time, just over 2 months at headquarters, and almost exclusively what I did was handle FISA matters. And I went before the various judges numerous times with FISA affidavits. And I'm telling you, the process works. The process is incredibly tedious. So if there's something wrong in that affidavit, it's because you are either grossly incompetent or you're intentionally lying. I'm telling you, the process is incredibly tedious, and it's meant to be that way. And I mean, I've shared this publicly. Going to the FBI director's house on a weekend to get him to sign off on the cover letter and ask questions. And then you go to the judge and they ask you questions like, what about this? What about this? Is not, even some people who are patriots say, oh, we got to get rid of the FISA court. That's nonsense. It's constitutional. It works. But when you have people who are affiants that lie, well, they should go to jail for that.
Right. Gentlemen, all good things must come to an end. I think we definitely have to have a round 2. Please, under a minute each. Let's wrap it up. Brad Johnson, you go first.
All right, very good. I echo what John was just saying there, pointing out the illegalities and problems with just across the board. But I think because you have problems within the CIA with possible involvement, you have clear problems with the FBI, some of which have been articulated even within their own IG report. You have DOJ involvement in the FISA request and a lot of other things. It's so clear now that there's a level of corruption at the leadership level that has to be addressed, that there's just no question that a special counsel has to be appointed at this point. I mean, there's just no other way around it, and you can't do it as individual investigations or IGs because you have a spread of agencies involved. So it has to be a council that can then take a look at all of these agencies. So I think it's time for a special counsel.
Brad, I think it's fair to say that looking back now, everything that we know, General Michael Flynn deserves an apology, and that he should. What do you think of that? He was entrapped, more or less, right?
There's no question that man was screwed twice and left wet in the ditch there. He was very badly treated, and I would hope that someday that the country can make that up to him and make it right for him as best as we can.
Right. And in one sentence, who is John Brennan, Brad?
Who is John Brennan?
Yeah.
Fruitcake. I think he's a complete fruitcake and an incompetent. And I think he's going to be a lot of legal trouble as this unfolds.
Just in case there's a misunderstanding from our viewers, because fruitcake has a couple contexts to it, how do you mean it?
Okay, in my case, fruitcake is guess I'm old, so I mean it in the old-fashioned way. I mean like crazy. That's what I mean.
Oh.
Okay, John, final words of wisdom go to you.
Well, I'm not sure I can give you words of wisdom. I'll give you my thoughts on what this whole thing has kind of shown us. I again go back to, I really believe we're missing a sense of urgency in this. I think the situation is much more grave in this country. I think there needs to be much more aggressive action taken to purge people out of the system. I mean, a close friend of mine is a former DOD IG, and all it would take is for Mr. Trump to have the IGs identify all the Obama appointees and tell them you got 12 hours to pack up your office and get out. That'd be a good start. With regards to all of this, you have got just a level of corruption that is so significant, that is criminal, and I believe in many cases seditious, and in some cases treasonous. And I think, again, we should prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. And if I had one recommendation, it would be to elevate Brad Johnson to a senior position in the agency. I'm not sure. I'd love to see him as the CIA director. I think he'd be much more suited to running operations and clearing house there. But either way, it'd be a great start.
And if I'm not hired as some kind of an advisor, can I at least be a coffee and tea errand boy?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But you'd have to talk to Brad.
Okay. John, 2 sentences for each question, please, because we got to go. Michael Flynn definitely deserves an apology, correct?
I think he served this nation honorably, and he has been treated incredibly poorly, and that's a gross understatement.
And who is John Brennan in under 2 sentences?
I think John Brennan is a man without an anchor, and a man that has floated into some very dangerous waters. I agree with the assessment of Brad. I don't think he's mentally stable. I think he's dangerous, and I think he's treasonous.
What an honor to speak to an ex-FBI agent and to a former CIA station chief, both of whom love this country and courageously are fighting today to protect it. John Guandolo and Brad Johnson, thank you for joining the Glazov gang.
Jamie, thanks so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie.
Thank you very much. Hope you guys will come back. Thanks for joining the Glazov gang this evening. Please remember, we're a fan-generated program. So if you support what we do, please support us at jamieglazov.com. And make sure, at the least, you are subscribed to the YouTube channel of the Glazov gang. Good night.